Double Indemnity from 1944 was one of the finest crime films I've ever seen. Directed by Billy Wilder and written with crime author Raymond Chandler, it was adapted from a novel by James M. Cain. And the film stars three legends of Hollywood, Fred MacMurray, Barbara Stanwyck, and Edward G. Robinson. Here's my review of this excellent film. Well, the movie opens up with Fred MacMurray playing Walter Neff, an insurance man who's arriving at his office late at night, looking weak and sick. Looks like he's got a gunshot injury, too. He looks over the empty office room, and oh man, what a different world it was back then. All those desks, pre-cubicles, pre-remote working, and so on. Well, he goes into his office, sits at his desk, takes a smoke, and starts recording, during the course of which he confesses to a murder. And the film from this point on is pretty much all told as flashbacks going forward. And we open up his narrative with Walter going to visit a client, Mr. Dietrichson, at a swanky place in California out in the hills. As he says, one of those Spanish California houses that must have cost somebody $30,000. Yeah, different times indeed. Well, while there, he steps inside and meets with the gorgeous Barbara Stanwyck, who plays Phyllis Dietrichson, the wife of his client. And right away, there's some sparks, there's some chemistry between them. It's a little bit of spicy dialogue, but ultimately she tells him to return later to speak to her husband. All right, be careful here, Walter. Anyhow, back at the office, we are introduced to Edward G. Robinson's character, Barton Keyes, who is ranting against this poor guy who is trying to get an insurance payment. Barton pretty much tears into this guy's claim, telling him he's a fraud and boots him out of the office heartlessly. So we kind of established that Barton knows his business and he can see through phoniness in an insurance claim. Now that's going to be important a little later, dear viewer. We see that Walter and Barton, for their differences, have been friends for a long time. Well, Walter goes to visit with Phyllis at her home. Her husband, and the maid for that matter, are out. So it's just the two of them talking about insurance all nice and cozy. Walter is sort of a sleaze with some of his dialogue and a little lubricious, but Phyllis drops the idea of getting an insurance policy for her husband because he works in a dangerous line of work and getting this against his knowledge because he's stubborn or something, just in case he dies. And to his credit, at this point, Walter isn't a complete bad guy, and he calls her on this as being wrong to do, and he leaves. Then he goes off and has a beer and does some bowling to clear his thoughts. Yeah, nothing like beer and bowling to help get your head together, However, a little later back at his apartment, he seems haunted by Phyllis, and sure enough, she soon shows up, and after some trite dialogue, they kiss. Oh no, Walter. Well, over drinks, she laments her situation. She says she's married to an unloving, abusive husband. Walter, of course, falls for it, and they start scheming together about an insurance plot. Even though earlier in the film, they kind of established how ridiculously impossible insurance schemes are to pull. But maybe he has a scheme that will actually work. Well, let's see. The next day, he meets with Mr. Dietrichson, who's played by actor Tom Powers, who I've seen before in films like Angel and the Bad Man with John Wayne. And his daughter is there as well, Lola, played by actress Jean Heather. And Walter makes his insurance pitch. Mr. Dietrichson doesn't seem all that convinced that he needs insurance. He's kind of stubborn, but he does sign for the auto policy renewal. And it's here that Walter pulls a sneaky and gets him to sign another form unaware that he didn't bother to read. Kind of like those end-user license agreements that none of us ever read. Yeah, same thing. Now, on the way out of earshot, he tells Phyllis that the death must be on a train in order to get something called double indemnity. The title of the movie. Double indemnity is where an insurance company agrees to pay the insured double the amount covered if the loss is due to a weird, specific circumstance. In this case, death on a train. As Walter heads out, he finds that Lola is sitting in his car, basically asking for a ride to town, and he obliges, and he drops her off to meet with her boyfriend, Nino, actor Byron Barr. Walter and Phyllis start meeting when they can, kind of in secret at this grocery store where they have like little bits of sneaky dialogue with one another. And I love these old grocery stores from the past. We see the shelves are stocked with those old-looking products. It's it's great. I love it. So they conspire together of how they're going to pull off this murder of her husband on the train. So they go ahead with their diabolical plan. Walter does a lot of clever things to make sure he has covered himself with an alibi, like dropping off his car to get worked on, leaving a card in his old-fashioned phone that will tell him if he gets a call, etc. Phyllis takes her husband to the car, and he's got like a broken leg, so he comes out hobbling on his crutches. And Walter is hiding in the back seat. And as they get close to the station, she honks the horn to signal for Walter to kill him. And it's interesting, as the murder takes place, you only hear muffled gurgle noises as the camera stays fixed on Phyllis, who's driving the entire time. They get to the station, and Walter bandages up his leg to look like Mr. Dietrichson, and then he hobbles off onto the train. So far, everything goes without a hitch. He kisses Phyllis goodbye, pretending to be the husband, and then he goes on the train and heads to the observation deck. So far, so good. However, on the observation deck, there's another guy, a cheerful Mr. Jackson, played by Porter Hall. He's a great actor I've reviewed in a number of other films like His Girl Friday and The Thin Man. And he's just this cheerful guy who just wants to chat, while Walter's just trying to remain anonymous. You know, it's part of a scheme. But Walter asks Mr. Jackson to go back and get his cigar case, and it's around this time he hops from the train. Now, it's only going about 15 miles an hour, but he gets off the train, meets up with Phyllis at a nearby car, and then they dump Dietrichson's dead body on the tracks to make it look like he had been on the train and had fallen out and died. Pretty clever so far, but you know, I've seen enough CSI shows to think that, I don't know, there should have been enough clues and fingerprints that this would never work today. But hey, it's 1944, so forensics was probably not that advanced. And sorry, let's keep going. A momentary panic as their car won't stop so they can leave. But he finally turns it over, and then they take off. He runs down the routine with her again of what to say at the inquest and so on. And then he heads home. He changes clothes, checks in with his friend Charlie, who's working on his car, you know, maintaining that alibi, and then he goes for a walk. But he starts to feel oddly paranoid that something is wrong. I know, I mean, what would Bub think of all of this? Well, the next day, Walter and Barton have to meet with Mr. Norton, actor Richard Gaines. He's kind of like the bigwig of the insurance company, and he is none too pleased about this double indemnity issue going on. And he's really excellent as this greedy insurance executive. Phyllis is brought in for questioning, and that's when Norton hits her with the belief that the death was actually a suicide. Oh, well, Phyllis won't hear it and leaves in a huff. Barton then digs in with an Oscar-worthy monologue about suicide statistics and how improbable death would be from jumping from a 15-mile-an-hour train. And, you know, I would love to include all of this monologue because it's amazing. But no more copyright claims for me. So I linked the scene below in the description of the video. I hope it's still there. It's a great clip. And if you don't see anything else of this film, just watch that bit with Edward G. Robinson. It's amazing. Well, back at his apartment, Phyllis calls Walter and wants to stop by to see him. But unexpectedly at the same time, Barton shows up. You know, he's bothered by the case and the probability of it all, and he just can't get his head around it. Now, Phyllis is on her way there, and as Barton leaves, there's that very nice bit of Hitchcock-style suspense as she hides behind the door so Barton can't see her, just barely out of sight. So once he finally leaves, she meets with Walter. She's worried that since the crime took place, it's been pulling them apart. And in typical crime noir fashion, he replies, "Shut up, baby," followed by a kiss. Smooch. Yeah, typical crime movie stuff. I love it. So as we get close to the end of the film, this is when Lola comes back and visits with Walter and talks to him about the suspicious death of her mother. And no more spoilers, no more details, but as we near the end of the film, things take a fascinating twist. And you have to watch this one for yourself to see how it all wraps up. The film continues to build the suspense wonderfully. Barton continues his driven investigation. And poor Walter and Phyllis, what's going to happen? How are things going to end? Well, you got to see this for yourself. It's an amazing conclusion. Some closing thoughts. This was a fantastic film, probably one of the greatest of the crime noir films I've watched so far. in terms of the story and the performances. As I mentioned, it was directed by Billy Wilder, who also directed some other favorite films of mine, Stalag 17 and Sunset Boulevard, among others. He worked on the script with crime author Raymond Chandler, of the character Philip Marlowe, The Big Sleep, and it was adapted from a novel by James M. Cain. The score to Double Indemnity was also by Miklos Rozas. This film just had so much going for it. The performances, of course, are amazing. Fred MacMurray does a fantastic job going very dark in this film. And yeah, I'm probably not the only one who has problems, kind of divorcing his character from that of Steve Douglas from My Three Sons, because here he's so very dark and sinister and very detailed in his cunning schemes involving murder. I did enjoy his chemistry here with Barbara Stanwyck. Both have previously starred together in the film Remember the Night from 1940, and that one's on my list to check out as well. And Barbara Stanwyck is hands down one of my favorite actresses. She's been in quite a few of my reviews on this channel so far. There's an interesting anecdote from the trivia in that initially she was afraid of this role, and she confided with director Wilder about this. And he said to her, quote, "Well, are you a mouse or an actress?" And that was enough to motivate her. And boy, she really put herself into this very manipulative character role. And what I loved about this film with her is that you find her so convincing, or maybe it was just me, that it was really up until the very end you legitimately want to believe in the plight of her character. Maybe she is sincere. Who really knows? But she just pulls it off perfectly. It's different from, say, Mary Beth Hughes' femme fatale character from the movie The Great Flammarion. That's a film I reviewed recently, which bore some similarities to this film. But in that situation, you knew from the very beginning she was bad news. But here I found Barbara Stanwyck's character Phyllis to be something of an enigma. You just have to watch her. She's very convincing. And yes, I did read some of the comments about her hair in the movie and what very clearly appears to be a wig. It wasn't too distracting for me, but as some have noted, it does add an element of artificiality to her character. So don't be distracted by the hair. It's a minor thing. Edward G. Robinson is, of course, amazing. This is a far cry from his gangster characters from like Little Caesar. And instead, he's just a very sharp insurance guy with a shrewd mind who seems to be constantly thinking about the details of claims and seems especially driven to unravel the mystery of Mr. Dietrichson's death. He's great in this film. Even though Raymond Chandler and Billy Wilder parted on bad terms, if you look close at one scene, Raymond Chandler actually makes a brief cameo in the film. And also in researching, supposedly, there's a deleted, missing scene out there from this film in which Barton watches Walter get executed. That is dark. I couldn't track it down, but I did find a still of it in this online book, the Movie Buff's book, and I have it linked below. Now, that would have really been going dark with this, but alas, that's not how the film actually ended. So that doesn't count as a spoiler, okay? Anyhow, final note, there were a couple interesting scenes of local area footage. I love finding those in a movie, and there's one really great one, which is the Dietrichson House at 6301 Quebec Drive, which, from what I found, looks very similar today, which is really cool. I have it linked to the Street View link in the description below. You can check it out. It's really cool. Anyhow, that's my review of Double Indemnity, an excellent crime film, and it's definitely one you should go and check out.